Well, today we're going to look at the spaces in between the negative spaces. That's right, we're going to do some negative painting, and it's going to be with a subject I've never done before, at least not with negative painting. The results were a little bit interesting. I think you're going to love it. Hello minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. So glad you could join me. Well, you know, if you're primarily a transparent watercolor painter, at some point, and maybe a lot of times, you're going to be doing some negative painting. And I want to just point out what that is in case you're a beginner and new to the medium. Take a simple scene like this. This was done for a little etcher demo, and these darker passages here where it cuts into the lighter foliage, that is all negatively painted. So this would have all been painted in a light color, but then after it dried, come back in and define these edges with darker negative painting. That's the basics, the gist of what negative painting is. And the reason that's so prevalent in transparent watercolor is because you don't paint the highlights in watercolor. You leave the highlights. That's the biggest difference between this and an opaque medium. So in order to obtain these highlights, you have to leave them and sort of cut into them with negative painting. There's a lot in these paintings. This here, where we have these light grasses in front, that was all negative painted. It's a way of seeing. It's a neat way to train your eye to see shapes and values. Value has a shape, and it really may have nothing to do with the object you're painting. I know a lot of you out there, I'm belaboring the point, you know what negative painting is. But it's something I would really encourage you to practice. All of this was painted lightly, but then come in with these darker foliage parts, which look like they're behind the lighter parts. And they cut into and sort of dovetail with the lighter parts. See, this wasn't negatively painted. This was masked, and that's different. And you can do that too. All of these needles were masked, and then the background was just completely painted in one swoop. The mask was removed, and then the needles were painted. So that's another approach. But generally, you can't mask everything when you're painting in watercolor, so you got to negative paint. Well, I was looking through Pinterest the other day, looking at some root reference. And I thought, I love to paint trees, as you know, if you've been around this channel long. And I was seeing some root examples. And I thought, that would make a great negative painting exercise. So that is what we are going to do today. Now, you could draw this and draw all the little individual roots, leaving the space. And you could go in and paint all those parts and pieces separately. But I'm going to approach it instead as one root mound and focus on what these shapes in between and behind the roots are like. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's get to it. I've actually drawn out some trees here, but instead of drawing out all the individual roots, this is how we're going to study those negative shapes, around the roots. And I'm hoping this approach is going to allow me to be a little more inventive with my trees and my roots. All right, well, we're going to just start by filling in some of these tree shapes with flat color, or mostly flat color. I just want to give myself a whole bunch of trees, a whole bunch of root mounds, because I want to practice and try this technique over and over again. And what I'm hoping is that by filling in negative spaces, and I'm actually studying some of the photo reference that I have to see what some of those negative spaces look like, I can be more inventive and spontaneous with the roots. So in other words, I don't need to meticulously draw out every root, which you can do, but there's nothing wrong with doing that. This is just a study in negative, seeing and negative spaces, and it's very valuable. Any place where you have light colored shapes that are very, very organic, like flowers or trees or leaves, and there's negative space in between them, usually that's dark, it makes for a really good possible study subject. And it just kind of hones your ability to see. What I'm doing here is just presenting some distance, where it gets cooler, these trees get cooler and fainter as they go back. And as you can see, I've got a whole lot of root mounds and trees. So I'm going to do a whole lot of negative space painting on these roots. And I'm just adding a little bit of texture here and there on the trees, but these are my lightest values. So we're going to get started, and I'm approaching it gingerly because I want to kind of see and fumble my way through it to see how it works. And if you want to try this, what you really have to do is get you some good tree root reference so you can look at what those shapes look like. Some of them are long and slender. Most of them are very oval or teardrop shaped or football shape, elongated, sort of. I don't even know how to describe it. But here you can see I'm just starting to go wild with it. And it was a lot of fun. And I think the most fun thing about it was that the root shapes, you sort of stagger these negative shapes. The root shapes just sort of appeared. That was the spontaneous, inventive part of it. I really did not design how these roots would look, but with the negative spaces being put in, the roots just sort of emerged, and that was enormously fun. And usually these negative spaces have a shadow or a darker shade towards the top, and then they fade out as they come down because they're deeper. The tones, the shadows are deeper up under those recesses. Kind of hard to explain. And as you go, you can get more detailed and refined on how you do these shapes. And it can become a negative, positive experience. As you see those positive root shapes developing, you can change or alter or add negative shapes. I hope I'm making sense that sort of accentuate that. And I'm making these root balls really extreme. I mean, to go into a forest and see a bunch of trees like this, kind of creepy. Wait till we get to the end. It really does look kind of creepy. But, there's a method to my madness. And I can just tell you, it was very, very fun, to see these roots just kind of emerge. Sort of like developing a print in a bath for any of you out there who used to develop film. Put a print in a developing tray and watch the image come up. It's just really kind of neat. Well, I have most of the root shapes defined, so while this was intended to be a study, I thought, well, why not just go ahead and see if I can turn it into an actual scene. So that's what I'm doing. I did not like my furthest layer, which really was nothing. It was just sort of a hill, so I'm turning that into sort of a foliage or brush line behind all those trees, adding a few more fine trees, turn it into some kind of a scene and add some distance and dimension. It really looks strange though, doesn't it? I mean, these trees, they look like organic creatures, like they're going to eat you if you walk into this forest. I had not intended to make this look like some scene out of a horror film. then we're into the final detailing phase, just adding some fine branches, and it was kind of fun. I actually did feel like I was able to turn it into a scene. I was not planning or prepared for how ghostly this thing would look. And I learned something, I learned something just beside studying the roots and the negative shape. I learned how to get that distance with color. There's really only a couple, 3 colors here. Red Iron Oxide, Ultramarine Blue, some neutral tint. And I basically all I did was mix a warm gray and a cool gray. And the grays get cooler as they go back and lighter. And it just made it look like a ghostly light was coming into this sort of forest. Let's remove the tape and see how we ended up. I was pretty happy with that. Atmosphere aside, and just go back and add a few more finer details. Yeah, I need to paint a ghost in there somewhere. The final touches also included this where I scrubbed in some highlights just to give the final bit of dimension to some of those foreground roots. And man, I mean, as a study, this was a big learning experience. It just really came out great, I thought. It accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with it. Thanks, everyone. I really do appreciate you watching. Thank you so much, patrons, for your support in making this channel happen. We'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.